Hey everybody, Antoni here. Today I'm going to be talking about Verdi's Macbeth, which was shown last night at the Deutsche Oper Berlin. Now, I have my little program here with me so that just in case I forget any names, I always have this as my guide. So, the conductor was Paolo Arrivabeni, a name I haven't really encountered before until that evening. And the production was done by Robert Carson, who is quite well known for his somewhat minimalist productions with a somewhat dark hue to the lighting and all that. And the title antihero, Macbeth, was portrayed by Thomas Johannes Meyer, and his wife, Lady Macbeth, is portrayed by Marianne Cornetti. Now that the basics is out of the way, let's get on to the production. Now, as I said, since this is a Robert Carson production, it is quite minimalist in its approach, or in its staging. Basically, the lighting all throughout is quite bleak. There are a lot of grayish tones applied, with the exception of the banquet scene, which is quite colorful. So, yes, all throughout, you basically see a lot of gray, a lot of dark hues, and yeah, it's basically dark colors all throughout. I mean, what more can you expect of a tale that is of passion, ambition, and even greed, and murder for that matter? And another thing to note about this production is that it seems to be based on like World War One, because with the witches, you basically see them as these either beggar women or cleaning women or a combination of both. So yeah, they're basically like cleaning women. And for Macbeth and Banquo, they are like they are generals, but basically of World War One times, military generals. And with Lady Macbeth, she comes off as, the general's wife. And yeah, that's all I have to say. I mean, the men were usually dressed in trench coats and ties and suits, whereas the women were dressed up like secretaries, so to say, with the exception of Lady Macbeth having the a light green ball gown. Now, I know I might be nitpicking here, but I wouldn't always associate light green with Lady Macbeth. I would probably associate either red or blue or even black. I mean, it's not really to stereotype her, but I think those colors suit Lady Macbeth better than a light green ball gown. But that's just me. So, and just to keep from all these consistent pauses, the production sets basically like move from one scene to the other. I mean, it's basically like mechanically automated, so to say, so that there won't be too long of pauses. And just looking at it, it doesn't really look like a Scottish castle. It's more of a somewhat of like a concentration camp, or even like one of those workstations for soldiers of World War One. And yeah, I mean, basically, it's not all flashy colors all throughout. And some of the things that the characters do, even while singing their arias, is quite questionable. I mean, with Lady Macbeth singing La Luce Langue, she has her lady in waiting with her. And basically, she's changing for the ball. She's basically changing into her ball gown. I wouldn't always associate that with La Luce Langue. I would mostly associate it with, Lady Macbeth monologuing in the dark and scheming, like scheming. But yeah, I guess give her something to do just to make her not always stand there and sing. So yeah, that's quite understandable. And with Banco in his aria Come dal ciel precipita, it was basically set in an office and not in the not in the not in the woods as it would traditionally portray. It was basically set in an office with unsuspecting businessmen that are supposed to be his murderers. So yeah, it's quite questionable in its approach, but what the heck? It's quite innovative. I mean, and also quite subtle. I mean, it's supposed to mean like impending danger cloaked as something that's completely harmless, like men working in an office. And with the chorus Patria Oppressa, basically you see the commoners, so to say, or the bourgeois people with pictures of their loved ones held up like that, and they pasted in this huge wall as sort of like a remembrance to them. And I thought it was quite appropriate all throughout, and especially when Lady Macbeth comes in with a lamp and sees all of these photos of dead people, it's actually quite appropriate for her sleepwalking scene to know that these are the people that I killed. These are the people that me and my husband have killed. And another thing that I have to commend this production for is the thriller aspect. Like, for example, um, with the banquet scene, you see that huge this huge white spotlight is shown through like one chair, which is supposed to signify that of Banquo's ghost, and everything else goes to black. Yes, I think it could have been better if Banquo was actually there, also in body, but yes, I think it's more appropriate to see that he's actually there in spirit. And another example was also the picture of Macbeth. Well, basically, that was the third act. The picture of Macbeth that turns into the picture of Banquo. And basically, as the picture of Banquo, the picture basically zooms in until it reaches his face, until it reaches like the right side of his face. We basically see his eye and nose and all that. And when Macbeth shoots him with a gun, you actually see blood coming down from his forehead. Well, the portrait's forehead, which is actually quite thrilling, and it actually kind of scared me a bit. Well, what do you expect? Macbeth is supposed to be kind of scary. And here's a little hilarious segment from Macbeth that I thought was actually kind of cute. After Macbeth and Lady Macbeth depart the scene, there are like these crowds of people, and even though everything goes to black, they're like waving and waving their flags, which I thought was kind of cute. So overall, the production of this Macbeth was actually quite interesting, even though some of the actions are quite questionable. But what the heck, I'm not really complaining. I thought the production was good and very interesting and very innovative. Now let's get on to the singers. Now, there are two performers that I really, really loved with a passion in terms of this production of this opera. And they are Thomas Johannes Meyer and Albert Pesendorfer. Yes, they portrayed Macbeth and Banquo respectively. And all I have to say is that I really, really love the voices that they have. Basically, they are both virile and, well, resonant. There's a beautiful resonance to their voices, and that's pretty much saying something. I mean, because of the fact that they not only specialize in Wagner, but they also do Verdi as well. I mean, what do you expect? They also sing a lot of Verdi and Wagner, so probably that's a lot of things to like about them. Now, let's start off with Mr. Meyer as Macbeth. Now, as I said before, he has an absolutely gorgeous and virile voice. And I actually love the quality to his voice. It is a beautiful, powerful, Helden baritone voice, or bass baritone voice. It's actually that beautiful to listen to, and it's uniform in all the registers, whether he sings low notes or high notes. They're all uniform. And speaking of his acting, yes, to some people it is overly theatrical, but come on. This is Macbeth. I mean, his portrayal of Macbeth basically shows a man with power, but with that power came his overall insanity. It's like, oh my goodness. Yes, with a guy that has so much power, what the hell is he gonna do? And when he has that power, it's like, oh my goodness, he's somewhat slipping. And with all of these misdeeds, I mean, you can't even deny that. You can't even deny that as a person. Let's face it. He and his wife have done a lot of misdeeds, and it's actually really getting to him. So it wouldn't really be surprising that you see him screaming or going crazy like a madman. I mean, this guy basically has his conscience ripped apart. It's like, screw it. Screw my conscience. I'm just going insane. Especially in the final act. I mean, yes. Especially when Mr. Meyer's Macbeth was like, especially in his aria, Pietà, rispetto, amore, basically you could see the pain he has of, yes, he had all of this power, but in the end, he feels like he's lost everything. He feels like he blew everything up. He's messed everything up. And he basically has no other way to get himself out of that mess. Even though there was like that one little thing that he had to do, like kill Macduff, well, he feels like it was his last stab at getting power, but in the end, oops, he finds out that Macduff was actually born from a C-section, so he gets shot to death. So yeah, all I can say about Mr. Meyer's portrayal of Macbeth is that it is absolutely just harrowing, really. I mean, here's a man of power, a man of stature, and then you basically see him losing his mind, losing everything he has, and wow, it was just magnificent. He was not only magnificent in voice, but also magnificent in terms of acting. And he was able to portray and convey all of these emotions that Macbeth has as a man. So now let's get on to the banco, which is actually, yeah, his part may be small, but I love the singer of this role, Albert Pesendorfer. He specializes in a lot of basso profondo roles, especially from that of either Mozart, Verdi, or Wagner. And I absolutely love the quality of his voice. And to be honest, it is that great. It is sonorous. It is gravelly. It's it's not like tin. It is like it really has such a beautifully dark quality to his voice. I mean, I'm basically left speechless by talking about Mr. Pesendorfer. I thought he was absolutely amazing in voice. He was in tip-top form. He was able to make the best out of his small yet very important role of Banco. And his aria, Come dal ciel precipita, was sung beautifully. Believe me when I say this, that aria moves me to tears. And I could see why. Well, because Banco has seen that, yes, the prophecy of the witches came true, and this might be somewhat of an imminent danger for not only him, but also for his son. So that's why he begins the, the whole aria with Studia il passo mio figlio. Study the paths, my son. Basically, he's trying to tell him to be careful and to be careful of Macbeth's machinations because he himself will be a victim if he is not cautious. And basically, his life is at risk. Both of their lives are at risk, all because of Macbeth and the prophecy that the witches said. So, and another thing I like to note about this aria in this production, it's set in an office. Now, usually in traditional productions of Come dal ciel precipita, it would be set in the woods. It would be set in a dark forest. But since this is a somewhat modern production, um, at least I can actually tolerate it, even though it's set in an office. I mean, it's supposed to signify that, okay, it's in an office, good for them. But there's probably going to be someone that is pretty much a mercenary or a murderer that's pretty much going to kill him at the end of the process. So, yes, overall, I find Mr. Pesendorfer's portrayal of Banco to be very, very beautiful. His voice was in total tip top form, without any patches, without any problems in his voice, and basically, it was a very commendable performance. Now, let's move on to the Lady Macbeth. Marianne Cornetti, a very well-known dramatic mezzo-soprano. Now, I have to say, she does a good job as Lady Macbeth. I mean, basically, she didn't really portray her as an evil woman, but more like a woman who is a lot calmer than that of her husband. She's pretty much like, well, in terms of the Macbeths, pretty much the only sane woman to Macbeth's rages and rants and raves and all that. Basically, she's quite more composed than her husband until that sleepwalking scene where she holds a lamp and basically sees these were the victims I've killed along with my husband. And yeah, all I could say is that acting wise, she didn't really portray Lady Macbeth as an evil woman. She didn't portray her as a witch at all, but basically a woman who is a lot more sane than her husband, but quite power hungry, though she keeps it at a minimum. Now, in terms of her singing, I understand that a lot of people who have heard Marianne Cornetti's voice, they kind of have problems with her pitch going almost all over the place. But frankly, as Lady Macbeth, I thought she was actually pretty great. Yes, some of her highest notes, like her high Cs, have a tendency to be flat, and in fact, she kind of started off the opera on a bit of a weak note. But she managed to get better and better all throughout. And all I have to say is that her high A's, her high B's, and her high B flats are actually very piercing, more so than her high C's. And that's actually saying something. And all I have to say is that her voice may not always be in tip top form, but when it comes to acting in a sort of less is more way, she's actually pretty good. Well, in terms of Lady Macbeth. And yeah, her high A's and high B's and high B flats are actually spot on. They're actually quite well pitched. But another problem that I had with her Lady Macbeth was in the drinking song, Sicolmi il calice. And the coloraturas were a bit uncertain, so to say. They were a bit muddled. And her high notes at times were very pitchy, but that's a small price to pay. I mean, she's actually pretty good all throughout. I mean, no complaints about Lady Macbeth, and to be honest, I honestly like it when a dramatic mezzo sings her. Oh, sure, Lady Macbeth is originally written for a dramatic soprano, but when you have a dramatic mezzo singing the role of Lady Macbeth, and if you have a dramatic baritone singing Macbeth, there can be a lot of awesome chemistry, especially if the dramatic mezzo has really great high notes. Sure, she is not always spot on like Shirley Verrett, nor does she have that type of finesse, nor does she have this type of ferocity like Gail Gilmore has, but hey, she's Marianne Cornetti. She is her own singer. Now, let's get on to the Macduff of the evening, Thomas Blondel. For those of you who know him as a singer, you'll basically recognize that he sings a lot of Baroque works, Mozart works, and even works that are usually bel canto, though minor characters, so to say. Well, his intonation was spot on all throughout, but there are times that he is quite underpowered as Macduff in terms of voice. Acting wise, he's actually pretty good, and he makes great use of his small role, but it's quite important to the opera. Now, usually when I think of a singer that sings Macduff, I would usually think of singers like Luciano Pavarotti, Placido Domingo, Jose Carreras, Mario del Monaco, Franco Corelli, Franco Bonisoli, all of these great spinto tenors or lyric tenors with a lot more heft in their voice. But with Thomas Blondel, he's more of a light lyric tenor, so him being casted in that role is quite questionable. But still, his intonation was actually pretty good. It's just that his voice isn't really my ideal voice for a Macduff. I mean, it's not like I could sing any better, but so what? But yeah, I mean, it's not to belittle Mr. Blondel's talent. I mean, he's a great singer. It's just that this is not really his type of role. I mean, he could have been casted as Malcolm, which is actually a light lyric tenor role, but, well, still, he does a pretty good job in terms of intonation and in terms of acting. That's all I can say for Mr. Blondell. Now for the Malcolm. We have Clemens Bieber, a veteran tenor who has sung in a lot of German theaters, Austrian theaters, and some theaters in America. He was underutilized as Malcolm in this production. He was really underutilized, but he was still in tip-top form, and I mean, he still had a good voice for someone who has been singing for a very long time. He still has a very good voice. It's just that he was so underutilized. I mean, especially after La Paterna Mano. I mean, I would usually expect that Malcolm would come in running with soldiers, starting with the Dove Siamping and then ending with La Patria Tradita. Now, it was quite disappointing, but yeah, that was pretty much the only setback of this production. The lack of the duet between Malcolm and Macduff with the chorus, aka La Patria Tradita, which I think is actually quite awesome, seeing two tenors sing with a huge orchestra and with a huge chorus. That would have been really awesome, but too bad that part was cut off. And instead, we transitioned to the scene before Lady Macbeth's sleepwalking scene. So, yeah, it was quite pitiful seeing that Mr. Clemens Bieber didn't really have such a bigger role as Malcolm, but it was a pretty big price to pay. But yes, I'm not really complaining about his voice. I mean, his voice is still good. And the minor roles, like the Lady in Waiting, which was sung by Fionnuala McCarthy, and the servant, Dr. Harold, which were sung by Andrew Harris, and the Three Spirits were actually pretty good all throughout. So, overall, a very interesting production of Macbeth, very innovative in its approach, though at times questionable. The singers, for the most part, are actually really good, with the standouts being Mr. Pesendorfer and Mr. Meyer. And all I have to say is that it was a really great evening all throughout. I have nothing else to say. So, overall, a great production, but it could have been better. Even though, yes, there were setbacks, like the whole La Patria Tradita chorus being omitted, but that's a small price to pay. So, overall, I enjoyed the production, and I have to say that if you haven't seen this yet, well, go ahead and see it. For those who have seen it, if you've seen it, then go ahead and post it in the comments below to let me see what you think, or if you kind of disagree with my thoughts, or if you agree with my thoughts, or anything. So, that's all for now, and until next time.